Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. Similar to Washington, D.C. under Donald Trump, there is never a dull moment in Rome with Pope Francis occupying the chair of Peter. He weighed in this week on U.S. immigration policy. He spoke about rigid religious groups, and he issued a video message for the Super Bowl. To help us make sense of it all is the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin, who joins us from Rome. Edward, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Raymond.
I want to start with that Wednesday audience address where the Pope seemingly took a shot at President Trump's immigration policy. He said, and this is the quote, "I appeal not to create walls, but to build bridges, to not respond to evil with evil, to defeat evil with good, the offense with forgiveness." A Christian would never say, "You will pay for that." Never. That is not a Christian gesture. An offense you overcome with forgiveness, to live in peace with everyone. Why do you think the Pope is getting so pointed and political, Edward, and how is it being received in Rome?
Well, this goes to the heart, Raymond, of the Pope's strong concern for immigration, of course, and that he's spoken about this before. We all remember, of course, I think when he came back from Mexico last year, he said pretty much the same thing when asked about Donald Trump. And he said, you know, we need a person who wants to build walls and not build bridges is not a Christian.
Right.
And he basically repeated that this time, but made it even more specific by using the terms, obviously, that they know somebody else shouldn't pay for it.
Right.
So I think there's no doubt that who he's trying to address with this.
I want to move on to Amoris Laetitia, which continues despite our best efforts to crowd out other headlines. But this story just won't die because every week it seems somebody else contributes to this ongoing international dialogue about just what the papal teaching means. This was, of course, Pope Francis's document on the family, and it continues to churn up controversy. Last week, the German Bishops' Conference issued guidelines on Amoris Laetitia, indicating that civilly divorced and remarried Catholics can receive communion on a case-by-case basis. Now, Cardinal Reinhard Marx says there was unanimity among the German bishops on this. But this seems to be at odds with what Cardinal Muller, who runs the Vatican's doctrinal office, is saying. What are you hearing, Edward?
Well, exactly that, Raymond. I mean, there's this division of opinion, and the German bishops, Cardinal Marx said, are unanimous. That's not quite true. I think there's certainly the majority of them are in support of that position, but not all of them. And of course, Cardinal Muller, who is German himself, head of the doctrinal congregation, is on a completely different page. But I spoke to Cardinal Marx briefly about this, and he said, you know, the line he thinks is very clear in Amoris Laetitia, and the line of the Pope in particular. So I think for him, it's all basically cut and dry. But as I say, there's a big mix of opinion, and that's of course why the dubia was issued by the four cardinals.
Yeah, and the dubia, which the Pope has yet to answer, those 5 questions posed by these cardinals about Amoris Laetitia. Before I move on from Germany, you did an interview this week with the Father Hans Langendorfer. Tell us who he is and why this is important, what you learned.
Yes, he's the General Secretary, Raymond, of the German Bishops' Conference, and he is sort of the sort of hidden mover and shaker behind the German bishops, as I understand from good sources in Germany, and that he really is the sort of brains behind all of these big decisions. What was interesting in his interview was that he basically was very rigid, if you like, and very strong on the issue of the church tax, and that must be paid, and if you don't pay it, you can't be active in the Catholic Church in Germany. But of course, he was very sort of loose on the Amoris Laetitia question, saying that discernment is the issue there. So there's, I think it shows very much the sort of the complete illogicality, I think many people feel, within the German bishops and the way they think.
Yeah. Speaking of German thinking, there was a story that Cardinal Walter Casper of Amoris Laetitia fame told Italian television this week that he believes intercommunion between Protestants and Catholics in mixed marriages is fine. He told them, in certain cases, I think yes, if they share the same faith in the Eucharist, this is presupposed, and if they are interiorly disposed, they can refer to their conscience to go to communion. And this, I think, is also the position of the current Pope. Edward Pentin, is it? and our individual consciences the new guides here.
Yes, I mean, it should be said here, Raymond, that of course there are some exceptions. There is some allowance of intercommunion already that was introduced under John Paul II. But in this case, he's talking about a much broader sense of practice and allowing mixed marriages, mixed couples to receive Holy Communion. So it's going along quite a far distance from what we have already. And of course, that's been criticized, widely criticized in the past. I think it is probably the Holy Father's position, because he's spoken very freely about the Eucharist in terms of trying to allow, everybody. It's he's trying to allow everyone to receive the Eucharist who he feels needs it, which of course is very benevolent, but of course it runs into problems with theologians and certainly sacramental theologians.
Yeah, I sense a slew of new dubias floating into the papal room there. The Pope spoke to male religious superiors in November, and the transcript was just made available. In it, he says, in fact, he decries what he calls Restorationist orders that give rigidity. He said, when they tell me that there's a congregation that draws so many vocations, I must confess I worry. How is this being received in Rome?
Well, I mean, this is kind of, it's consistent, Raymond, with very much the Pope's line. It seems to be the case with Pope Francis that looking forward is the only way. Looking back, looking at tradition, looking at the way the Church has always done it is just not acceptable anymore. And so it's always looking forward, and especially when he talks about new orders and that they could be restorationists. Well, that, of course, is anathema to the Holy Father, who thinks that everything should be done looking forward and not back. So in a sense, there's not much surprise about this, but of course it has, of course, shocked some people as well.
He also, I mean, according to reports, derided Medjugorje and the alleged appearances of Our Lady there. He called her a post-mistress, one who drops a new letter whenever she appears. This is sure to rankle a lot of people and upset many who had a conversion experience or a change of heart while visiting that particular locale.
Yes, but again, Raymond, this is not particularly new. He said this before. I think a couple of years ago he said pretty much the same words. And I think it's just reiterating that. I don't know, nobody knows quite how he feels about Medjugorje, but there is a commission, of course, that finished a couple of years ago, and we're just waiting for the Pope's pronouncement on that. So maybe it's coming soon.
There are also these very strange posters that popped up over the weekend in Rome, Edward, and we'll put them up on the screen. These were popping up everywhere, and it was a sort of grimacing picture of the Pope, and it read at the bottom of the poster, "Ah, Francis, you've taken over congregations, removed priests, decapitated the Order of Malta and the Franciscans of the Immaculate, ignored cardinals, but where is your mercy?" Who are the sources of these posters, Edward?
Well, this is a mystery. I mean, I heard today there is some rumors going around that it's a conservative group who are unhappy with the Pope, not traditionalists, and that they're from Rome. But I understand also the sort of sense in Rome, too, among Romans is that they're not particularly happy with Francis. Of course, you can't generalize too much, but I do know from Romans I've spoken to that they're not very happy about the sort of immigration issue, and they think that he should be a bit more even-handed about that. But it's not clear who did this. But of course, it caused a lot of news here and around the world. It's the first time, I think, since the Papal States that this has happened. So clearly, there's a lot of unease developing around this pontificate, as I think many viewers will be aware already.
There was another story. It was on the cover of the New York Times this week. Actually, you were mentioned in the story. And it concerned Steve Bannon, who is a counselor to President Trump, and a meeting he had, I believe, in 2014 with Cardinal Burke. And the piece tried to somehow conflate Cardinal Burke's trying to get an answer from the Pope and clarification on Amoris Laetitia with Steve Bannon and Donald Trump's political agenda. Does Steve Bannon wield some unseen power at the Vatican, or am I missing something?
Well, I think he's quite influential in the White House, of course, but in the Vatican, I think that story was generally made up to fit a narrative. And of course, the New York Times always tends to look at things through a political lens. And I think they saw a potentially good story here of pitching Steve Bannon with sort of orthodox conservative forces in the Vatican. Of course, that was completely misconstrued. There wasn't that took place. I was there, and I remember Steve Bannon came as basically like a reporter for Breitbart, and he just did a series of interviews and met a few people, including myself. But he as far as, for example, Cardinal Burke was concerned, it was just an interview. It wasn't a set meeting or anything else like that. It was just a radio interview he did with Cardinal Burke. So I think it's been overdone, this story, to really fit the New York Times and the way they want to see the world and the church.
Yeah, no, I spoke to some producers at another network, and they were trying to get me to comment on this. I'm like, guys, I don't see it. There's no smoking gun here. I don't see this properly sourced. I don't understand the story. Steve Bannon visited the Vatican. That's like me saying I visited a network, so I'm trying to take over the network. I mean, it was really stretching. But do you see a coming to the head, if you will, of forces in Europe, in Rome, attempting to conflate Orthodox Catholics, concerned Catholics, with a political agenda and the Trump agenda, and sort of write them all off as kind of lunatic fringe alt-right, or whatever the operative word of the day is?
I think that is a general sense. I mean, there was... Yes, I think that sort of tying it to the so-called far right and to try and sort of caricature that political side as being far right, I think that is a general attempt. But I should say that Steve Bannon, when I met him, I think the church probably is quite happy that he's there in many ways, because he does stand up for a lot of the issues which the church considers very important. Of course, the immigration one is very debatable, but on the sort of pro-life issues, he seemed very much on side. And so I think in those cases, I think it's helpful for the church. But I don't think there's any sort of cabal or anything like that that's developing here. I think there's just some hope that things have changed now that President Trump is in the White House.
Very good. Edward Pentin, thank you for being here and for your insight. You can follow all of Edward Pentin's reportage for the National Catholic Register at ncregister.com.